Hello, good morning. Can you hear me fine? Is it okay? Perfect. I see all thumbs up. Thank you, and good morning. I would like to welcome you all to the Elder Party breakfast. Um, uh, First of all, I would like to welcome and thanks to the participants here with us in the room, but also we have participants online, so I would like to welcome them as well. And we will discuss this morning the importance of growing digital market in Europe, and also the importance of preparing for Europe's digital future, which I think is a very topical issue to discuss today. And I'm really happy, and I think it's excellent that we have today with us two representatives who work directly on these issues on this portfolio. And I would like also to give a special thanks to our corporate stakeholder Shopify, who can provide pivotal insights to this conversation. Um, just for a quick introduction, you may be familiar with many digital proposals that were discussed and will be still discussed on the level of European institutions. For the e-commerce, I think issues and or pieces of legislation that have been already adopted, such as Digital Markets Act or Digital Services Act, are particularly important. We have some very strong regional e-commerce players in Europe, and I think the legislation was actually aiming at putting in place some environment that would help the digital markets and services grow in Europe, and also to make sure that there is a level playing field. I had the opportunity myself to work on Digital Markets Act as a rapporteur of the opinion that was adopted in Committee for Civil Liberties, Justice and Interior Affairs in the European Parliament. And we had some tough discussions on the file. How should actually these pieces of legislation should be balanced? And I think this would be also very important and very interesting actually to hear your views, how the regulatory framework should be set in Europe, so that we make sure that there is a level playing field, but also that we don't undermine the competition in the single market, which I think is one of the key features of it. The DMA had, and I think let's hope that when implemented, it will be able to reduce the concentration of market power, especially in big companies, mostly coming from non-European countries, and also by doing that, just giving more room for European companies actually to grow, to scale up across the market. And I think this idea of actually putting some new rules into competition policy in Europe that would also benefit the European SMEs to have better access to digital single market was one of the key prerequisites why the DMA was actually discussed and put in place. I believe, and we had this discussion also before we started this breakfast, that the digitalization in not only in e-commerce, but I think in economy is definitely way forward, and it can provide a huge opportunities for European economy, for European industries, but also for European consumers, which I think is important to highlight as well. And we need to be able to set a regulatory framework that is friendly to the business environment, but also is key in terms of guaranteeing some safeguards and principles that we cherish in European Union as very important parts of rights that we have. So I really look forward to hearing from our panelists on their views on the current market trends, on the way the regulatory framework can actually impact it, and let's hopefully remove barriers and provide opportunities. But obviously, I think all the insights would be very interesting to hear. And with that, I would like now pass the floor to our panelists to give us their views, and then after their remarks, we will go straight to Q&A session and have a debate with the audience. So please.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Shimona Mehta. I'm the managing director at Shopify. And for those of you that don't know who Shopify is, we're a Canadian founded software platform founded by a German national, actually, Toby Luca, back in 2007. And we power millions of small businesses around the world in order to be able to start, build, grow, and scale their businesses. And we power them in about 175 countries around the world, including all 27 EU countries. Really dynamic and innovative companies like Snox in Germany or Cowboy right here in Belgium, who I'm excited to go visit a little bit later today. And one of the things I'm most proud of about Shopify and the work that we do in empowering people to be able to start, grow, and build and scale their businesses is the economic impact that they have. Collectively, the merchants that we work with in Europe in 2021 powered the creation of almost 300,000 jobs and drove through over $40 billion in economic activity, right? Our job is to be able to provide them the software and the platform and the tools to be able to find new customers wherever they are, to be able to manage their inventory, their financial services, to be able to get that done. And unlike other larger platforms and marketplaces, what we aim to do is to be kind of that invisible middleman so that brands can really create those direct relationships with their customers. We want it to be about small businesses shining in order to be able to create those direct relationships, to be able to build loyalty with their customers, and to be able to grow and expand across borders. We're here to empower them to be able to grow. So really important for us as we have this conversation today to make sure that we're thinking about how we continue to remove barriers from people being able to start businesses, right? How do we remove friction from people being able to start small business? How do we remove friction from creating that ability for small businesses to find new customers? We've seen a lot of regulatory changes recently, of course, that create some of that friction in being able to, in the digital advertising space, in order to be able to find and acquire new customers. Today, it's 5 times more expensive to drive traffic to an online store than it was in previous years, right? That starts to create a lot of friction for a small business in being able to go out and find new customers. And we're seeing a few key trends that are creating a lot of change in what we see as the next decade of commerce. Of course, we see the economic conditions of today are creating some of that challenge. We see and the spend. We do know, and we've seen through some research that we've just completed with thousands of consumers and merchants that we are gearing up for a very good and I think aggressive holiday season and Black Friday, Cyber Monday. And we see that consumers are looking to spend, but part of that is because they're looking ahead towards needing to be more conservative with their spending next year, right? And so we'll talk a little bit about those economic changes that are happening. 2, of course, is the internet. As we've talked about some of those regulatory changes, it's 5 times more expensive now to be able to drive traffic to your sites. And the last, of course, is this onset and the onset of social commerce, right? And the coming in board of social commerce. And knowing that we need to find, it's not anymore about offline commerce and brick and mortar or online or somewhere else. Retail is everywhere, right? And so being able to, as a small business, to be able to show up wherever your customers are going to be is paramount and important in being able to, again, find customers wherever they are. So how do we make sure that we remove roadblocks from customers being able to do that, build deep relations with their customers? The next decade of commerce is what we're calling C2C, or connect to consumer, right? If the last decade was about D2C and direct to consumer, the next decade is C2C, and the importance of being able to find customers wherever they are. And I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about, we'll see also the onset and the next wave, or the frontier of online also being in Web3 as well. We'll chat a little bit about that too.
I'll go next. So Juliette Bolaton, I'm Public Affairs Advisor for the European Association E-Commerce Europe. So we're an umbrella association representing through our national e-commerce association about 150,000 merchants. from, I think we'll cover some of those today, but from very various business models, realities, sectors. So I think the variety of the sector is the most exciting thing probably to work on in this field. And of course, because our job is basically to keep everyone aware, keep everyone understanding of the evolutions and the policy impact of what we're seeing. We care a lot about the future and how we assess it. So I think preparing for this event, we were sort of brainstorming with my colleagues on the future of e-commerce, which is a huge topic. But I think we're in the moment. It's interesting that we're quite caught up in recent events. It's interesting to see that it's hard to look forward for us as the sector sort of rebalancing. We went from very strange years of the pandemic. We recovered, and then we went back into a recession. So it's such a huge amount of moving pieces that's currently affecting trust, that's currently affecting the prospects at the same time. But we do see that the situation is really improving, and there's, I think, a lot of enthusiasm for e-commerce in the coming months and years as well. So we've done, I think, one of the biggest thing when you think about the future of e-commerce is that it's here to stay in people's life. During the pandemic, some people maybe didn't think of it, had to rely on it. The recent survey that we've done across our market is that throughout the EU, 73% of people having access to internet shopped online in the last year in 2020. So we're sort of setting, it's a very high, I mean, it seems normal to us, but it's actually a very high number when we think about it as a channel to rely on. So for sure, I think that's a feature that's here to stay. And, growing number of consumer also means that the way they see retail is going to impact the way our sector evolves. And I'm sure we'll dive into this, but you already mentioned some of them. For us, the fading line between online and offline and omnichannel commerce is a huge aspect. It was born, before the pandemic, but sort of like developed as a necessity, and is completely here to stay. I mean, it's a huge demand from consumer to have this like very fluid experience. And also we can see new technologies really integrating in that as well in the process. And I'm a bit biased because it's a topic I work on, but I think another aspect of the future of e-commerce will be sustainability. There's no way we can talk about the next 10 years without mentioning our impact on the environment and how do we leverage e-commerce and digitalization as well for sustainable purposes, and also helping smaller companies that don't have the impact, they're not the one, necessarily impacting the circular economy and the environment as much. So we need to empower them as well to get into that business and that environment. So yeah, I already mentioned this weird movement from that now entering into recession and sort of continuing to moving our understanding of the future. But I think we'll need a couple more years to assess the impact. But it's been such a huge concern on supply chains as well, and costs and so on, that I think it has a direct effect, but it will be long lasting to some extent to the choice you make as a business, I think. But yeah, and it's a bit of an occupational hazard, but we're very interested in seeing how policy will impact e-commerce, because it's always a double. So the way e-commerce develops impacts policy, because of course we need to react to some of the changes that are happening, and at the same time we see policy sort of embracing and trying to boost some of the changes already. And I think sustainability again is a good example of that. There's a myriad of policy that we're discussing at the moment that will make it easier, I think, for reliable players in the sustainability field to operate, as long as we, as you mentioned, take down some barriers and really think about the complexity of operating a business in Europe today. So it's we're very, I think, lobbyists, we're quite short term because we tend to focus on the text in front of us. This is sort of what we see impacting the future. But I'm also really interested to hear more on the technology aspect, because we have a lot to learn from companies like yours who shape this sector.
Thanks a lot. I think many very interesting and important issues were raised in your introductory remarks. Uh, I think would be great to start a debate. I definitely invite the audience here actually to prepare questions, and if you already have some, to raise your hands and raise them also with our panelists. And if you allow, I break the ice to give you more time for that. But I think to build upon what has been just said, it would be interesting also to hear from you, Shimona, on terms of uh, the the fact the sustainability concerns impact the current trends and future development, because I agree that this will be definitely one of the profiling trends, not only in e-commerce, but I think more general in economy and in the way we do business, and we will do business, and we will regulate business also in Europe. So from your experience, to what extent the consumers are already aware and actually actively looking for? Because I think the sustainability will also go with very active consumers approach. It may be turning them from just let's say a passive consumer to basically an active stakeholder in it. So to what extent these concerns are already demonstrated in the markets, and what would be your comments in terms of how this should be, or how this will be actually tackled in the e-commerce in the years to come?
From a sustainability perspective. Yeah. It's so interesting actually to have watched some of the shift in sustainability over the last couple of years, where we do obviously a lot of work talking to consumers and to brands, and over the last few years, we've seen this shift of I intend to purchase from sustainable brands, I intend to make sustainable purchase decisions, to I am actively, and I will continue to. And what we've actually seen over this past year, we actually just completed some research as we prepared for the holiday season and Black Friday, Cyber Monday coming up. And we can see that consumers are preparing to spend this holiday season. But what we're hearing are a couple of key things. One is almost 3/4 of consumers are going to spend on quality, durable goods that will last, and they're spending time researching and understanding. And what we're seeing as well is more than half of consumers say that they're actively shopping from sustainable brands and making sustainable conscious choices, and will continue to. And in fact, in France, we saw that the highest percentage of that, where I think it was about 2/3 of consumers are intending to purchase from sustainable brands and make sustainable choices. And further to that, again, in a contrast, I think, to the world that we've all been living in for the last little while, around that right now attitude, right? Give it to me now, that instant gratification. What we're seeing is consumers are actually saying they're willing to wait longer for a package to be delivered to them if it means lowering a carbon footprint. Right. So when consumers start to vote with their feet and their dollars in that way, this now helps to drive what we've known that brands and small businesses need to be working on anyways, which is sustainability practices. I think one of the keys, though, as we talk specifically about small business to understand, is from a footprint perspective. Stores and brands themselves are only actually one small piece of the puzzle when it comes to sustainability, right? Their practices in store, their packaging, how they deliver. The rest of it comes from the supply chain. Right. And so we have to make sure that we're helping. Again, you talked about from a circular perspective, larger brands are very vertically integrated often, right? They own their suppliers. And so as we talk about the needs and the ability to, create policies around sustainability, we have to make sure, that we've got the voice of small business at the table, right? And their ability to, and what ability they have to impact sustainability practices. How are we looking at the entire supply chain? And how do we make sure that what we're not putting in place, again, are barriers to small businesses being able to shop with the right, work with the right suppliers, and again, have access to being able to build and innovate. So we see our consumers voting that way. The concern, of course, is just ensuring that small businesses have access to the suppliers that they need. Again, we don't create barriers to them being able to enter into the market, and to be able to start and to build and succeed.
Thank you. I think really, really interesting numbers and the really interesting statistics that really show to what extent the sustainability concerns are already um, sort of part of the considerations of consumers. Um, Maybe if I can follow up to it to this, Juliette, from your membership, I think we heard also. Um, Changes in the way the supply chains are organized. The supply chains are actually also actively formed by businesses. Um, do you see some? I mean, obviously, through the pandemic, we had issues about global deliveries. There were many businesses considering whether the way they do business is actually um, resilient enough to the external shocks that we were witnessing. So do you see any changes in these trends, the way the supply chains are actually reflecting those considerations, be it sustainability, be it also the way the goods and services are provided and sourced in this regard?
Maybe to start on sustainability, because I think it's something we've focused on quite heavily, or how circular economy and sustainability has considerably complexified supply chains and our understanding of a very, linear way of producing and directly selling to consumer. I think some of the most exciting businesses that we see at the moment are, the some of the fastest growing segment in e-commerce are re-commerce, refurbishment. I mean, e-commerce has opened new ways of making spare parts circulate in the EU market, and even, well, what would be qualified as waste, but is not waste, something that still has value and still moves around and still can be somehow recuperated. I think it's funny because it's circling back to the very, very early age of e-commerce, when e-commerce was also born out of the need of like buying something broken online and be like, it's okay, I'll fix it, but I'm happy I found it because I was looking for it. So I think we're for this, it's so much harder to grasp now because there's no this direct supply anymore, and I think shops are looking at a way of maximizing the values of the goods that they have and produce and make them circulate more. And I think that's probably also one of the impact of the pandemic. I mean, to some extent, the boom of refurbishment can also be explained by the fact that at some point we're just missing parts, new parts. They're not produced anymore, and we need to find new inventive way of making products last longer because we're more conscious of the fact that it can be difficult. So I think for the sustainability aspect, that's definitely a big part, and happy to reflect on the policy implication of this after as well. But I think for the wider context, it's a bit more difficult, of course. I mean, most of our members are sellers, they're not producers, they're not manufacturers. So here, there's still a certain level of dependency, and having to deal with the partners that you have. But I think we're also in an era of transparency, which will come. Maybe it's not the case yet. So it's something that's hard to predict, but we'll have to see, how transparency in the supply chains can empower sellers, for example, to rethink who they work with, who they and so on. I mean, the digital product passport, for example, that discussed at EU level, that might bring about a different understanding of the information you get and who you deal with, and so on. It will come at a great cost in terms of compliance and so on. But potentially that would have a big impact, I think, on the flow of data and the flow of products and parts in the supply chain as well in the future. So a lot of, again, lots of moving pieces there, and definitely lots of changes and opportunities for sustainability on those aspects.
Very interesting. Let me scan quickly through the audience whether some questions already show up. But I think would be also interesting. You both mentioned the possible policy implications, and I think I would be not placed rightly here if I don't ask about your recommendations to the policymakers and to regulators in this regard. Shimona, you mentioned when discussing the overall situation in e-commerce and the environment, to what extent the regulatory framework can actually help businesses to grow and innovate by removing obstacles. And I think this very often is the key question for how we deepen and how we actually widen the single market in Europe. That's one of the key questions. But also there are other issues that are sort of part of the regulatory work and the regulatory framework and in the European Union. So what would be your assessment, let's say, of the regulatory framework, the public policy as they are discussed, and would there be any specific issue or any specific point that you would be happy actually if the policymakers would give more attention to or address in the future, based on also your forecasts and foresights in terms of the trends that will be driving the e-commerce?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for that. I think there's a few things. We see obviously a lot of like regulation and policy that's coming through. I think particularly for small business, we need to make compliance with, permitting and licensing and taxes and all of these things as easy as possible, right? So making sure that we've got the right education in place. You and I talked about this a little bit before as we started, right? We know that in many cases, when it comes to policies and regulations, small businesses don't necessarily have the ability and resources to deeply understand them, right? So how do we make compliance as easy as possible so that, again, we don't create barriers and friction further when they come up against roadblocks? We want to ensure that we provide, and I'm going to plug a little bit here, but we provide like really great, easy to use tools for businesses to be able to start, build, and grow, like Shopify, obviously. But again, as we talk to a lot of governments as they're thinking about how they can empower and reinvigorate small business, and it's about making sure that the right tools are available to them. So really deeply understanding, again, the future of e-commerce and ensuring that there's access to some of these tools are available to them. And then, of course, if there's an area that I would love for us to be spending a lot more time on, it's on international data transfers, right? We know that there needs to be a long-term solution to the current uncertainty that there is around international data transfers. And those data flows are really critical for businesses to be able to, and brands to be able to, again, connect with consumers, to be able to build and understand and make the right decisions for their businesses. So if there's one specific space that I know that we probably spend the most time on, it's those international data transfers. You and I were talking just a little bit earlier, right, around GDPR. And again, this gray box that exists where small businesses don't even understand how to assess it, understand it, how to be compliant. And we really need to make and create clarity around this for small business.
Indeed, I think very, very, very good point. And I think you also know that there's a lot of discussion on data related legislation in Europe. I think we're very creative in terms of bringing various data.
Creative's a good word.
Indeed, but I think indeed very, very important. We have one questions from the audience, so I think I'll give you the floor to introduce yourself and raise your question.
Sure. I'm Lewis from Shopify. Shimona, you mentioned a lot of the tools beyond Shopify that merchants will use to sort of scale their businesses in Europe. And speaking to merchants, it's really quite impressive to learn about the thriving ecosystem of tools they use, from logistics through to personalization, through to shipping, loyalty, everything, you name it, right? Like Europe has this thriving ecosystem of tools that can sort of help merchants extend their e-commerce businesses in new directions, reach new customers, etc. It'd be interesting to hear from the panel, like what their perspective is on this ecosystem and how what you're doing to help this ecosystem thrive, and what value merchants see in this sort of ecosystem of other support services that are built by European entrepreneurs, European developers, across the region, and how we can sort of help merchants get even more value from this ecosystem in future.
Yeah, I'll start really quickly, Lewis. I think it's in developing the ecosystem around that is actually paramount, and actually brings again a lot of local innovation as well, right? We've talked a little bit about, I think, a really great innovative tech hub that you've got in Czech as well, right? So ensuring that we are building the right tools and services that unlock small business specific to the local economies is really important, right? Financial services and being able to provide the right payments options in the right markets, again, is a really great example of that. And when being able to unlock that, right? Small businesses being able to use the payment options that make the most sense in a local market, right? Whether it's status pay or, the buy now, pay later options or whatever it is that we see coming up in the markets today. And so, yeah, those being able to empower local options to be able to build that ecosystem around the technology that makes sense for local markets really helps, again, local markets be able to build on top of those ecosystems. I think that we see, we work with thousands of local partners just here in Europe alone, and to see them come up and really start to build and innovate around the tools that we provide has been actually quite inspiring. But again, it makes commerce local.
Maybe if I can jump as well on that. It's so complex today, I think, to operate a small e-commerce business. There's a lot of demands for very various delivery options, and you mentioned payments options and so on. So I think if you can have support in going the extra way to finding the right partner, I mean, you mentioned payments already, so maybe if I think of logistics, like the amount of, scenarios that you have to think of to cater for consumer demands in terms of logistics, especially, and to go back to the local aspect, the boom of third-party provider of a zero mobility delivery solution in city centers, for example. Who's the right partner to go to? Who's the one who's the most plugged in, and who's the one who's exciting? So I think it's such so finding a way to connect e-commerce companies to those partners who are innovating and revolutionizing a little bit, like this extra step that you have to take to make your business appealing is very important. And here we might be talking more about local regulation. Maybe the EU is it's a bit too niche to focus on, but for sure there's ways of encouraging and facilitating, I think, the growth of those solutions as well, in countries and then maybe the EU. But then we touch on questions of harmonization and so on. So I'll keep that for the policy aspect. But I mean, as an association, we're very excited we tend to extend and try to dig a little bit on, the innovative partner and so on, and try to get excited about the future. So yeah, definitely a huge part of today's thinking of e-commerce. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. And yes, please just keep your policy considerations for some point. But we have two more questions from the audience. I'll give you floor to. Yeah, I think it's good for our online audience actually that they can hear us better.
Thank you very
Please.
much. My name is Mikael Nitsch. I work at BCW, Bashtan Conan Wolf Consultancy. I actually have one question to each of you, if it's possible. But then you decide which one you allow. Shimona, you said something that I found very interesting, and I was wondering whether you could say more about that. Namely, you said that consumers are ready to spend more around Black Friday and the coming festive season. I understand, in view of lower spending because the economy is not doing that well, which would imply that actually the consumers are quite conscious, quite capable of managing their budgets, and quite aware of possible and potential traps. So I was wondering whether you could develop on that. I think it would be great to hear. There is a related question that I have to Andre as a regulator, actually. I'm not sure whether I can ask questions to the moderator, but I will try. So
This is a liberal platform,
I
so
happen-
whatever you find appropriate.
I happen to work between others on the Consumer Credit Directive revision, which currently is the stage of trilogues, and I can definitely see since the beginning that there is a big preoccupation by the consumer awareness and protecting consumers against different types of traps or committing to buying things and then not being able to pay it and so on and so forth. But I would say, like, if consumers are that aware, what do you think from your perspective is the red line? Where can we actually assume that consumers are grown enough, and where the EU should stop regulating, actually? So that's a question to you. And finally, I have a question to you, Juliette. As you were talking about sustainability a lot, and it's indeed a very relevant and interesting subject. In this framework, would you be able to say a little bit more about the second-hand market? So basically, what consumers are selling to other consumers, actually, which seems to also be quite growing currently. Does it form part of the sustainability discussions from your experience? And how big is this piece of cake, of the market cake? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. So I would reorganize them a bit. I would first allow ladies to respond, and then I'll come back on the CCD. Shimona would like to start.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been really interesting for us to learn and watch consumer behavior over the last little while. And what we've been seeing through some of our research and what consumers and brands are telling us is we're seeing consumers kind of fall into kind of three categories: is considered, conscious, and connected, right? And so what we'll see through this holiday season, we talked a little bit about, they're preparing to spend, but they're really being considered in their purchases, right? So they're looking at, who are the brands that I trust? They're looking to research the purchases that they're making because they want quality over quantity and all of that. They're looking to make sustainable choices for sure. And we're seeing that particularly like from a clothing, really durable goods. We're also seeing half of consumers looking to spend on experiences where they can spend time with family and friends. So it's actually not just goods that they're looking to spend on, but really quality experiences. And they're spending time researching where they're shopping. From a conscious perspective, we talked a little bit before about this, the consistent move in behavior towards sustainability. And from a connected perspective, which to me comes and ties right back to being considered, is they're looking to shop from brands that they really identify with and feel they have a relationship with, that one-to-one, right? And so social connecting with brands through social commerce actually is, we've seen actually quadruple Q1 this year over year. Right. And we continue to see that drive. We know that consumers are going to social platforms to discover new brands and to make purchase decisions, and very often complete their purchase right there. So we're seeing this consumer in those three avenues. When we look towards next year, they tell us that they're spending now and in the holiday season because they intend and they expect that they're going to be more conservative with their dollars next year. We'll see what next year brings. But I'd say right now, consumers are definitely being a little bit more discerning in the types of purchases now in the way that they're preparing for in the way that they're preparing for next year. And what we see is that opportunity again for brands to ensure that they're providing all of the right options and sales. One I just heard about, actually we were chatting about before, I was chatting about Cowboy right here in Belgium. What they're doing for Black Friday, Cyber Monday, their sale will be around refurbished bikes, right? So they're understanding who their consumer is deeply and that they're looking for that sustainable option, and they're capitalizing in the right way, right? And they're connecting with consumers who care about in those things in the right way. So yes, definitely more discerning with their dollars, very specific in how they're choosing their brands, in the types of goods that they're spending on, and the sustainability factor as well. So it looks like they're getting ready to, or as I've been saying, it's like what consumers are telling us, it's like that last cheat meal before a diet, but who knows how long that diet lasts, right? So yeah.
So on the consumer to consumer sell, I think it's in some markets it's always been big. I think in France, I don't have the numbers exactly, but in France the main C2C platform is one of the biggest e-commerce player in the market. So it's I I think it's something that came about really fast as e-commerce developed. But it is interesting as well. Again, unfortunately, I don't have the numbers on me, but we drafted a collaborative report on e-commerce and sustainability during COVID. And one of the elements that we noticed is that COVID made people declutter their home. We didn't have much else to we didn't have much else to do. So I think a lot of people actually use this opportunity to clean up a lot of things and sell online a lot. And it gives you a different perspective on what you own, how much value. So you can imagine that if there's value in the goods you sell, there's value in the goods you buy from another consumer. So I think for that, it's definitely here to stay. Of course, it's interesting because it's such a difficult part of e-commerce to grasp from a policy perspective. How do you address those exchange from consumers to consumers? I think I swear I'll come back to that later, but we're working on the durability of products and so on. But how do we make sure that we don't impose rules on the durability of products that de facto impacts products that are more sustainable because they're being reused, they're being shared, they're being so I think here it's a bit of maybe a policy question mark, which I don't have the answers to, but I think it's just going to keep growing, and I'm making assumption here, but I can imagine that with an economic downturn you also tend to turn towards cheaper option, and you question whether is it useful for me to buy something new if I can buy something that I can find on the marketplace or and so on. So it's an interesting space to watch for, in my opinion.
Very interesting. Thanks. I'll just very quickly react on consumer credit. I think, and actually, in my view, it has links to what has been just said. It's about empowering, and also I think it's about the level of literacy and awareness of consumers. I don't think the regulation should be, the one that is actually leading them through the process, step by step, very, very tightly. I think we should actually, still leave some freedom for choice, also freedom for options in terms of providing services. But you were asking about the red lines. I think, you can see red lines on two sides, right? On one hand, the red line would be you want to have a regulation that is actually preventing from manipulating consumers into bad decisions. Because you know that you are misusing their specific situation, etc., etc. And this were the cases in some countries, definitely, especially using the consumer credit as not a typical financial service provided by regulated financial institutions. I think that's on one hand. You really want to make sure that the consumer rights are protected in terms of their ability to make decisions. On the other hand, if we just go too strict on it, the other red line would be that you can actually completely limit the offer, and this motivate actually people from providing consumer credits, and that would be another bad option actually to do, because obviously there is a reason, and I think there's a use of instruments such as consumer credits for even in e-commerce. And we see many new ways. There was mentioned buy now pay later. That's a form of consumer credit to certain extent, right? And so there will be new types of products that will be offered. And I think in my view the right balance to strike would be somewhere in between, to make sure the consumers' rights are fully protected, but at the same time that the offer of the services actually can be still it can be maintained, but also it can be actually increased by providing new types of services. Let's see where the trilogue negotiations end. I know that there are some difficult positions they have to go through, but and it's funnily enough on both sides of the table are Czechs, because there's a Czech MEP that's running the show from the parliament, and there's Czech presidency on the council side. But I have sort of trust that they will be able to come up with a meaningful piece of legislation. Obviously, it's a directive, so then the national governments will step in. But I think it's also an important step to take in this regard. Coming back to moderating, we have another question for gentlemen in the second row. We still have time, so no worries. Please raise your question.
Yes, hello. Good morning. My name is Bert Hecht from BBVA, the Spanish bank. And I've got a question concerning the policy impact of enabling tools, obviously financial tools. And as you know, next year there will be few financial initiatives that can enable or take away existing barriers for e-commerce. And therefore, I would like to ask you for your views, for your recommendations on these upcoming files, which are the PSD2 revision, the digital euro, or maybe also open finance, which are very important for us, but I think also for you.
Any comments? Juliette, please start.
Oh, I could talk about that for too long. No, but maybe to mention a few words. So, thank you for asking the question of payments. Payments is sometimes forgotten when we talk about e-commerce because it's a bit less interesting than sustainability to some extent. But joke aside, so maybe just to give some context, I think because of the diversification of demands from consumers and also the question of costs and the need for more competition on the payment market for merchants, we were at the time, hopeful about PSD2 as a way of, leveraging those like new solutions, account-to-account payments, for example, that could maybe, develop and mature enough to be able to provide healthy competition on the market. So I think that was the hope. It didn't materialize as much as we would have hoped, if I'm being diplomatic. So I think there's we still see a lot of barriers for a lot of fintech companies to actually leverage the tools offered by PSD2. And I think the biggest issue that we've seen is that we haven't really seen this, almost European solution. So we don't really have an interesting, cross-border. I mean, there's a lot of development, and I'm sure those companies, are on the verge of being able to compete with established payment methods like international card schemes, for example, but we haven't quite reached this level of maturity yet. So hopefully what we hope, among other things, of course, from the revision is, can we dive into this again and try to lift some of the barriers that still exist, especially in terms of harmonization of standards. How do you allow a small player in the fintech sector to connect to different banks without having to go through multiple process in various institutions and countries and so on. So I think there's definitely an opportunity here to do more. And of course, the discussion will be around authentication, where, we've been talking, the discussions on payments are never new. I mean, we've been talking about seamless, invisible payments for many years now. But I think it's still really high on the agenda. The impact on frictionless payment is enormous on consumers. And I think for those who are familiar with the regulatory standard on strong customer authentication, it had a huge impact on the industry in terms of loss of revenues from the friction at checkout of people not being able to pay and not understanding why, and merchants not really being able to address it because it didn't have the level of transparency necessary to understand this either. So I'm not calling for a revision of SEA for my own sake as well, but I think we should think more about what is the actual objective we're pursuing, rather than focusing on how, like, mandating how actors should go there and do and achieve low level of frauds, because I think that was a bit of an issue originally of we tried to impose very specific way of doing something rather than telling actors that's where you need to be in 5 years and you need to figure out how to do this best. And I think that leads to maybe rules that can be a bit overly prescriptive in terms of innovation and what can be used as an authentication factor and so on. So yeah, we're hoping for very forward-looking, not necessarily extensive, but I think it will be interesting to bring back topics that were already there at PSD2 and try to approach them from a more collaborative approach as well. But yeah, I only touched on PSD2. Digital euro, very interesting, but I think we'll need a lot of consumer and merchant education. It is such a interesting yet complicated project. We're still wrapping our head around the opportunities for retail. So exciting thing to look into. And and instant payment, not much to say because it will be so in sync with PSD2 and this the flow of instant also availability of funds for SMEs and so on. So lots of opportunities there. But I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. And any comments, Shimona? No.
She covered everything.
Okay.
That was great.
No, I just wanted to say that as a member of Economic and Monetary Affairs Committee, I can assure you that the payment agenda, but also I think very important point on the open finance initiative, which may be actually very interesting. I mean, if done properly, it can be very interesting, both for the financial services providers, but also I think for e-commerce in general. And there was this issue of data exchanges, data flow, data access. I think this can be actually a good piece of legislation. So I just wanted to assure you that it's very high on our radar in the monetary economic and monetary affairs committee as well. Are there any? We have I think still 5 more minutes. I see question there. Please.
Hi, Pascal Koenig. I'm with Vulcan Consulting. And just as a little side note, I used to work with Juliette, did the payments on for e-commerce Europe. Very interesting. I think the one thing that hasn't been discussed is the need for ensuring consumer convenience. If we're talking about a single market, we still have aspects around geo-blocking regulation in place that from a consumer aspect doesn't make sense. If we go to the payments aspect, consumer convenience, it's to an extent it's balanced with fraud protection. But I remember sitting in a meeting with the commission at the time, trying to explain them with every window that pops up. I think the dropout rate at, there was a study a couple of years back, I think per extra window, it was a dropout rate of 30 or 40%, and the commission was straight out, which was like, well, that's how it is. Consumers just have to get used to, card readers and all of those things. And the same with the last mile aspects there as well. So I think those are key things that we have to think about from a consumer perspective as well, on how to think about that from a regulatory perspective as well, and how to bring that in.
Indeed. Any comments? I think.
Maybe just a small thought. Definitely, and also I think something you mentioned it with social commerce, but I think an aspect of social commerce is also most people are shopping on mobile now. And the way the younger generation shops is even like disarming to us now. And I think it's here to stay. I mean, the growth of mobile commerce is absolutely amazing within e-commerce. And I wish, if possible, I wish that, when we're discussing legislation, especially consumer information and convenience and so on, we could have a way of like projecting on our screen what it would look like as a consumer if we had to shop on our mobile with sometimes the requirements that are proposed. So what would it look like if I had to, choose a product, but then I couldn't see the product because there were so much things written and so much, information and so on. So I think if we could have a tool, maybe that's a, a company idea in a couple of years, but because I think it's key. So we need to empower a consumer, and we need to make it, possible for them to have all the information they need to make the right choice. How do we make that in a way that's, equipped to handle new ways of shopping and new generation as well? So that was just a quick reaction on this.
Yeah. And I totally agree with you, right? Everything that we do in retail moving forward is about consumer experience, right? That the hands and the power shift and the power dynamic in retail really shifted to the consumer when we all got these phones in our hands, right? We no longer have to go shopping. We don't go to a mall anymore or a store. We are shopping all the time. And the importance of creating as much seamlessness and removing all the friction from that buying experience really is paramount. And we see that at every stage, right? The more pop-ups we create, the more friction at the checkout, and all of those things that we do actually remove from conversion rates. And again, when we've made it that much more expensive and that much harder to actually find new customers, bring them to your site, we need to ensure that we remove friction from that buying experience, and to make it again seamless across all channels. You know, one interesting thing that a stat from some of our research that I find highly amusing is just over 50% of consumers say that they research a product and a brand online, so in social commerce and through Google searches and things, and then go purchase in store. And just over 50% of consumers say that they actually go research that product in store and then make the purchase online, right? So creating that seamlessness and that frictionness, no matter what channel they're in, is paramount to experience, because consumers want what they want, right? So if I want to go check it out and touch and feel a product in store, then be able to buy it online and have it shipped to me, that's great. If I want to be able to research pricing and reviews and things like that online, how do I do that seamlessly and then be able to go purchase it? And again, whether it's all of the pop-ups that come up, whether it's finding the right payment solutions that come up, making sure that there's clarity and transparency and customs fees and shipping fees and all those things, all of that we need to think through is, again, make it as easy as possible at every stage for consumers to make decisions and to be able to move through. And we find that when you remove friction from that experience for consumers, we see upwards, again, we see a difference of almost 40% in conversion rate when that happens. And so again, when it's become that much more expensive to acquire a new customer, doing every little bit we can to ensure and help these small businesses be able to convert those customers is really important.
Indeed, thank you. Thanks a lot for that. I think exciting debate. I can only confirm that the more clicks there is needed for anything, the lower the appetite to actually finalize the transaction. But pretty sure, I think very important to see what kind of technologies can be actually used of the protection of empowering consumers and protect rights, but at the same time improve the flow and the seamlessness of it. We are actually slightly over the time that was reserved for us, but I think it was really good debate. We still haven't touched issues like technologies, et cetera, shopping in metaverse and all these issues but I think that may be very good ideas for any of our future debate. At the end, I really like to thank Shopify for the partnership this year, and we're really grateful for the coordination and input on a series of very interesting events and topics. On top of that, I would like to thank our panelists. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your active participation. Not only consumers are empowered, but participants in the events are as well. And I think there was a very good input also from your side. Thank you very much. I wish you have a good day, and please join us at other events organized by ALDE Party in the future. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.